Hello, my name is Fiona Stone. Welcome to Last Orders, Inns, Taverns and Beer Houses of Lechlade, past and present. The picture you see here of the riverside is what many people, especially visitors, associate with the town. We will meet this establishment again later in the presentation. For now, let me take you back through the centuries to find out a bit more about the other hostelries that have played an important part in the story of Lechlade. Opening hours, from early days into the 17th century. The parish of Lechlade-on-Thames can be found at the southeastern point of Gloucestershire. If you had visited around the year 1700, you would have found 5 hostelries for its population of around 500 people. These were the Trout, the Swan, the George, the Red Lion, and the Crown. The Trout Inn at St John's Bridge contains part of a much older building dating to around 1229. This was the original almshouse and hospital, providing care and accommodation for the workmen building the new stone St John's Bridge, and later for the poor and sick of the nearby St John's Priory, which was dissolved in 1472. By at least 1692, it was an inn called St John Baptist Head, later renamed the Trout, possibly as early as 1704, although locals were still calling it by its former name as late as 1741, according to newspaper adverts. A conveyance of 1890 itemises stables, outbuildings, garden, island summer-house, a close of land called Fair Meadow, withy beds, and a wharf and garden between nearby St John's Lock and the River Thames. It was a favourite place for fishermen and boating parties in the mid to late Victorian era and is still active today. The George in St John Street now exists only in name, as recorded in deeds of between 1588 and 1787. It was situated on the north side of St John Street and included a convenient way and passage for carriages and horses through the said yard or backside into and from one other messuage called the Old Lane. The Red Lion Inn in Market-place has been known variously as the Old Red Lion and Lion Inn, as recorded in deeds of 1592 and 1608. It is likely at some time to have had access leading down to the river, which now no longer exists. Licensed as an alehouse in 1903, it traded up until 2009 when it became Pino's Italian Pub and Restaurant, continuing in the ownership of Arkell's Brewery. It is now an independent restaurant. The Swan Inn in Burford Street claims to be the oldest public house in Lechlade. As early as 1513, a premises called the Swan was in existence. It's not known exactly where. Around 1680, Richard Wellman lived on this site. His will, and that of his son also Richard, revealed that the messuage or inn called the Swan, with the outhouses and close, had a pigeon house or dove house, believed to have been situated above the stables, which are now residential. The close directly behind the inn is now called Pigeon Close, with Swan Close behind, but when the builder and architect Richard Pace owned it in 1838, together with its timber yard and gardens, according to the tithe apportionment of that date, it was all known as Swan Close. The inn was also a staging post for the Royal Mail and stagecoaches, which pass through the town, and is still a working hotel. The Crown Inn in High Street can be dated back to at least 1694, when William Hall, a yeoman, made his bequest to my grandson William Hall, or that messuage or tenement in Lechlade wherein I now dwell, known by the name of the Crown. An inventory of the premises shows that the building had a little parlour, hall, great parlour, cellar, brewhouse with room over, great stable, woodpile, little stable, backside, entry, garret, and rick barton, plenty to suggest it was a working brewery and inn. From 2008 to 20, it ran its own micro-brewery, the Halfpenny Brewery, its ales including Old Lech and Thames Tickler. The Crown is still active, although one side of the old inn, at one time a popular independent restaurant, is now being sold as apartments. Era, my dear. The 18th century. The 18th century saw two more premises, the Bell Inn and the New Inn. The Bell Inn abuts the old Tidford Lane, now called Bell Lane, once an important ancient way leading southwards to a crossing point in the river. Here a ferry once crossed the River Thames by the side of the old wharf. This became unnecessary after 1792, when the Halfpenny Toll Bridge was built, allowing easy road access southwards from the town. As a beer house, the Bell must have been vital to those using the river from around 1716 or possibly earlier. It traded until about 1896, when its licence was renewed for the last time, probably due to the intense competition from other beer houses down the high street at that time. It is now known as the Bell Pottery, a shop and private house. From 1753, victuallers and alehouse keepers had to promise to maintain good order through a recognizance, a bond, given at special Brewster sessions held by justices of the peace. Brightwell's Barrow 100, which included Lechlade, shows that there were 11 innkeepers recorded for Lechlade in 1755. In 1764, the New Inn opened. The landlord, who had previously lived at the Red Lion, created some competition and no doubt set a few tongues wagging by taking his business a few steps along the street to the large new-built house, finished in genteel and commodious manner, where all gentlemen, ladies and others may depend upon good entertainment and civil usage, and their favours will be gratefully acknowledged by their most obedient and humble servant, Isaac Wells, according to a contemporary local newspaper. This was a coaching inn appealing to the middling sort, the gentry and farmers, the hunters and anglers, who formed the majority in Lechlade in 1831, and their visiting friends. It was also the place of relaxation for the gentlemen of the vestry, who regularly adjourned there after meetings in the early 19th century. The centre of many auctions, coroners' inquests, and clubs, it was built in brick with an arch for carriages and horses, with stables at the rear, including 2 for cart horses. Lawns led down to the river and have been used over the years for social occasions such as picnics, swimming, and river-based activities, including skating during the Great Freeze of 1894. It is still a thriving hotel today. Mine's a pint into the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Alehouse Act of 1828 was designed to increase competition between brewers and to steer people away from strong spirits such as gin, abolishing the system of recognizances and bondsmen in favour of granting annual licences to inns, alehouses and victualling houses. The Beer Act of 1830 allowed the sale of beer, ale and cider by any householder who paid rates. All they needed was an excise licence costing 2 guineas for beer and 1 guinea for cider. As a result, many beer houses were set up, often using a person's own home. Between 1851 and 1861, Lechlade could boast 12 beer retailers and 3 new named premises, in addition to those already mentioned. These were the Raven, which appeared around 1853, licensed to let horses and carriages, the Royal Oak, present from at least 1856, when James Tinson, a Crimean war veteran, celebrated his return there, and the Queen's Head, which appeared briefly in the census of 1861. In 1861, the population of Lechlade had stood at 1,328, but by 1881 it had decreased by nearly 200, possibly due to the railway arriving in 1873, allowing greater flexibility of movement in and out of the town. The Licensing Act of 1872 had delivered restricted opening hours, unpopular with both working people and the brewers, returning responsibility of licensing to judges in divisional licensing sessions. In spite of this, a number of licensed premises in Lechlade continued to grow, many of these lasting only a few years, and some sharing the same premises but at different times. These were the Labourers' Arms, the Morning Star, the Nag's Head, the Railway Tavern, the Woodman's Arms, later renamed the Three Horseshoes, and the Fox and Hounds. Contemporary newspapers regularly reported changes of licence from one landlord to another, and the refusal of licences when no satisfactory person could be found as a replacement. Many of the landlords had additional jobs to make ends meet, and there was more than one bankruptcy amongst the innkeepers in the latter third of the 19th century, according to the Gazette and local newspapers. In 1893, the Railway Tavern became famous when it played an unwitting part in a gruesome and notorious double murder trial, when a man named Lapworth, a labourer and native of Lechlade, stopped there one evening, described by a witness as looking wild about the eyes, and then hastily departing when the missing individuals were mentioned. He was later charged with wilful murder. Newspapers made much of the trial, but he was found not guilty by the court. By the turn of the 20th century, the Marlborough Arms had taken the site of the Morning Star, and a beerhouse in Sherborne Street, which had been in existence since 1861, had been named the Sherborne Arms. Ice and a slice into the 21st century. The Licensing Act of 1904 introduced a rule that all applicants should submit plans of their premises to the licensing judges, the intention being to reduce the number of premises and improve the standard of those remaining. Compensation was to be paid to those licensees and owners whose license was refused. This saw the end in 1905 of the Fox and Hounds, the Marlborough Arms and the Labourers' Arms. They're now mainly residential. The Railway Tavern, the Sherborne Arms and the Nag's Head closed during the 1950s and are now private houses, and the Three Horseshoes closed in 1998 and the Royal Oak in 2011, also to become residential properties. We now turn to our opening image. This is the Riverside, the pub which rose from the dust of the old Park End Wharf. The arrow shows the main warehouse, which now forms part of the pub. The Riverside Park End Wharf. The Thames and Severn Canal Company bought the wharf in 1813, the canal having opened in 1789, allowing the transportation of goods, especially coal, from the west to Oxford and London by water. They built a new warehouse and an agent's house. In 1911, according to the census, George Hicks, coal and corn merchant, was also hiring out leisure boats. A garage and boat builder were present in the 1920s. By the end of the 1950s, the main warehouse had become a cafe, which was licensed in the 1960s and run as a restaurant and pub. In 2008, it was taken over by Arkell's Brewery and now also offers accommodation. A boat hire company still works alongside. Cheers, the survivors, the Trout, the Swan, the Crown Inn, the New Inn, the Riverside. Last orders in memoriam. The George, the Bell, the Queen's Head, the Labourers' Arms, the Raven, the Morning Star, the Marlborough Arms, the Nag's Head, the Red Lion, the Fox and Hounds, the Railway Tavern, the Royal Oak, the Sherborne Arms, the Woodman's Arms, the Three Horseshoes, and the many unnamed beer houses, including those still waiting to be identified. The records. Should you feel like doing some similar research in your local village or town, the types of records I've used for this presentation include deeds, conveyances, wills, inventories, tithe apportionment and map, ordnance survey maps, alehouse recognizances, licensing minutes and registers, directories, newspapers, 1841 to 1921 census, 1939 register, vestry minutes, population statistics, electoral registers and planning applications. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation and that you may be tempted to visit Lechlade and sample some of these historic buildings for yourself. Please contact me if you have any questions by email at info@timeaftertimefamilyhistory.uk or through my website timeaftertimefamilyhistory.uk. You can also find me on social media. Thank you very much for listening.